Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all, excellencies, representatives of civil society, dear friends. Welcome to what is actually the fourth meeting of the group of friends for the elimination of violence against women and girls. I'm very happy to be joined today by ILO Deputy Director General Martha Newton and representatives of the NGO Coalition Against Violence and Harassment at Work. And all this to mark the ILO Action Week to free the world of work from violence and harassment. I'd also like to welcome my dear friend, Ambassador Satyendra Prasad of Fiji and Sarah Nibs from the UN Women Office in Southeast Asia, who will help us to get started on the discussion in a moment. COVID-19 has reshaped the way many people work, shedding light on venues where work-related violence and harassment may occur, both in the formal or informal sector. Examples of chlorine thrown at nurses while commuting to and from work, or grocery store workers beaten or verbally abused by clients due to supply shortages, have been recorded during this difficult times. The increase in teleworking also appears to be translated into an increase in cyberbullying. It's difficult to capture a complete picture of gender-based violence committed in the world of work because only a small percentage of victims seem to report the abuse. For example, while it is estimated that up to 80% of women are at risk of sexual harassment at work, only 25% report such acts and only 5% complain more formally. And this is happening everywhere, including here at the UN. In a system-wide survey carried out in 2019, 1 in 3 respondents said that they had experienced sexual harassment at the UN. The way out of this is well known. In 2019, the International Labour Conference adopted the first standards on the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work, namely the ILO Violence and Harassment Convention 190, and its accompanying recommendation 206. The framework set out in these instruments provides a clear roadmap for preventing and addressing violence and harassment. The convention entered into force last Friday. 6 countries have ratified it already, and many more are in the process of doing so. The Generation Equality Forum, which will open tomorrow in Paris, will adopt a collective commitment on ILO Convention 190. The action will aim at increasing the number of countries that ratify international conventions against gender-based violence, as well as the number of private companies that have anti-gender-based violence policies in place. As the group of friends for the elimination of violence against women and girls here at the UN, we have a role to play to ensure more awareness in our respective countries, but also at the global level. Today's discussion is an opportunity to come out with a shared assessment of the situation and to discuss possible actions to be taken at the United Nations. Before I hand the floor to our panelists, let me reiterate the European Union's full commitment to put an end to violence and harassment at work. Like the Istanbul Convention, ILO Convention 190 addresses violence and harassment on the basis of a comprehensive approach, tackling prevention, protection from further violence, prosecution, and access to justice and policy coordination. We recognize this is the only way forward. That is why the European Commission has recommended that all EU member states ratify the convention. The Commission is also currently working on a new EU-wide legislative proposal to prevent and combat gender-based violence and domestic violence, online and offline. All forms of gender-based violence and harassment will be covered by the legislative initiative, following the model of the Istanbul Convention. Now, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel. Martha Newton, ILO Deputy Director General, Anita Thomas, Convener of the NGO Coalition to End Violence and Harassment in the World of Work, and my dear friend, Ambassador Satyendra Prasad, Permanent Representative of Fiji to the UN, the second country that has ratified the convention. So we will hear her first from Martha Newton, who will present the convention and explain why it is so important in the context of the pandemic. Ms. Newton, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Skoog, and thank you so much for your leadership on this important issue of ending violence and harassment in the world of work. Your excellencies and colleagues from UN agencies and representatives of civil society who are here today, we'd like to thank the group of friends for the elimination of violence against women and girls, as well as the NGO Coalition to End Violence and Harassment for organizing this important meeting. Please know that your work resonates far beyond New York. Also, just on a personal note, as someone who began my professional career in a prosecutor's office, helming a crime victims assistance division, I walked alongside victims of violence often perpetrated in the workplace who had no voice. And so I have a special personal affinity for Convention 190 and the importance of this instrument. So as Ambassador Skoog has alluded, we have 6 countries that have ratified ILO Convention 190. Mauritius, and we're about to have a 7th, is about to deposit the ratification instrument. And in many countries, including those where spotlight initiatives are ongoing, governments, employers, and worker organizations have taken steps or contributed towards ratification and implementation of Convention 190 despite COVID-19. Argentina, Ecuador, Namibia, and Somalia, and then of course, Uruguay and Fiji, and look forward to hearing from the ambassador today more in detail about how Fiji has moved forward on this initiative. Many other countries right now, and some of you who are present here today, are reviewing your national policies and legislation, doing awareness raising and capacity building. And all of these efforts are essential in accelerating progress towards delivering on Agenda 2030. So I'm glad to see so many people who are here today for this exchange. So just kind of taking you through what is Convention 190. So it's the latest ILO convention, which was adopted during our centenary in 2019. It recognizes the right of everyone to work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment. It calls for the promotion of a rights-based approach that recognizes that violence and harassment cannot end if fundamental principles and rights at work are at stake and decent work isn't promoted. And it calls for the adoption of an inclusive and integrated and gender-responsive approach in consultation with worker and employer organizations. So C190 envisions measures from prevention and protection to enforcement and remedies and guidance, training, and awareness raising. It calls for specific measures for women, individuals belonging to vulnerable groups, and for those working in sectors, occupations, and work arrangements which are more at risk of exposure to violence and harassment. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a somber reminder that we need to step up efforts to protect these individuals and leave no one behind. COVID-19 has also witnessed a surge of violence and harassment at work, and it's increased during the pandemic. And this has already been well documented, both in formal and informal working environments. But what perhaps has been less documented and yet presents serious concerns, Ambassador Skoog alluded to this, is the increase of online violence and harassment. In some countries, cases of online sexual harassment have seen an upsurge 5-fold since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Remote work has become a new normal for many of us and a formidable way of staying engaged during the pandemic. However, remote work has also blurred the lines between professional and personal life, with increased occupational stress and risk to mental health. And for those working at home, the risk of being exposed to domestic violence has also increased. For many people, home is not safe. So this needs to be addressed urgently. And Convention 190 provides the right compass to tackle this scourge, including by recognizing the key role the world of work can play in mitigating the effects of domestic violence and the opportunities that we can provide for victims of domestic violence to become survivors and obtain economic independence. And furthermore, from the socioeconomic perspective, COVID-19 has been detrimental to societies and to most vulnerable in particular. According to our latest data here at the ILO, the world has lost the equivalent of hours worked in 1 year by 255 million full-time workers. Informal economy workers, those in low-skilled jobs, migrants, and those belonging to ethnic and racial minorities, older persons, and those with disability and living with AIDS have suffered the most. So did women. I mean, the pandemic has a feminine face, and in part due to their overrepresentation in the hardest hit sectors, and in part because they've seen their unpaid care work increasing tremendously. So as we slowly emerge from the pandemic, we could not afford, and we should not expect, to find our society exactly where we left it 16 months ago. And despite its dreadful effects, the pandemic has helped us look differently at the ways that we work. And it's our collective responsibility. We need to capitalize on that. From now on, we'll be meeting differently, we'll plan differently, we'll learn differently, and we'll travel differently. But we also need to protect ourselves differently, our loved ones and our workers, co-workers and colleagues. We also, as such, when a country ratifies 190, it decides to grow differently and towards a better normal. So Convention 190 was adopted in a pre-COVID world in 2019, but it's never been more relative than it is today. As a legally binding instrument, it aims to stop violence and harassment at work, including gender-based violence that affects especially women and girls. It also addresses the needs of people in vulnerable situations who have been hardest hit by the pandemic. So the road ahead is long, and ratifying Convention 190 is just a first step. Moving towards ratification requires a genuine and inclusive national tripartite dialogue, which remains key for any sustainable and effective progress. Many of you here today represent your governments through your respective ministries of foreign affairs. And we here at the ILO salute your commitment to end violence and harassment at work. And we encourage you to engage with ministries of labor, as well as workers and employer organizations to discuss a way forward. Together, we can contribute to a culture of social dialogue and workplace cooperation. So the ILO stands ready to support countries that are embarking on ratification and implementation of C-190, convinced that such a process will be rewarding for you and your citizens. So thank you, and I look forward to being a part of the conversation today. Over.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Deputy Director General, for that presentation of the convention. It seems we have a very powerful and efficient instrument at our disposal here. So I think I want to turn now to Anita Thomas, who will share the views of civil society as a representative of the NGO Coalition to End Violence and Harassment in the World of Work. So, Ms. Thomas, are we doing the right things here? What is your advice to governments that want to move forward on this agenda? Over to you. I think you're muted.
Your Excellency, Ambassador of the European Union to the UN, Madam Deputy Director General of the ILO, Your Excellency, Ambassador of Fiji to the UN, Excellencies, NGO colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon. The NGO Coalition extends its appreciation to the group of friends and the EU mission for the opportunity to partner on this important event alongside the ILO. We also thank Beata Andres and Matthew Koniak from the ILO office in New York for their guidance and support. The coalition was created in 2019 at the initiative of 5 NGO committees to advance ratification of ILO Convention 190. With the onset of COVID-19, as reports of rising cases of violence against women and abuses targeting frontline workers came to light, the coalition drafted an advocacy letter calling for ratification of ILO C-190. Endorsed by 1,155 NGOs and CSOs, this letter was submitted to the UN member states in late 2020. The letter is attached with a concept note for this event and goes into much detail as to why we believe it is crucial to ratify, implement, and enforce C-190. I share a few additional points to set the stage for today's discussion. The Me Too movement revealed to us just how pervasive violence and harassment are in many workplaces. Globally, workplace harassment is criticized as gender discrimination and human rights violation. Yet, according to the 2020 Women, Business and Law report of the World Bank, 50 countries still lack any legislation granting protection to women from sexual harassment in employment. With the onset of COVID-19 and as Zoom, Skype, and Teams became ideal choices for business meetings, the harassers took to new techniques that fit the virtual world through actions such as mocking someone's home or sending lewd messages through the communication platforms, just to name a few. It is to be expected that remote work will continue in some form. So will harassments, both in the physical and the remote workplaces, until and unless policies that address the challenges are legislated and made justiciable. COVID-19 brought to light how the most vulnerable amongst us continue to suffer due to inaction or poor action. Ratifying C-190 will be a decisive step in the right direction. As workers begin to transition from being isolated in homes, the Society for Human Resources Management, SHRM, is cautioning its member HR professionals to expect a rise in workplace violence stemming from physical, mental, and financial stress associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, and to institute policies, if they are non-existent, to address workplace harassment and shore up mental health resources. SHRM's proposed measures would be feasible in formal workspaces. However, what about millions of informal workers, those in MSMEs and migrants working in highly unregulated sectors where abuses such as withholding wages and gender-based violence are pervasive? Many young people who already face challenges to complete their education in remote classrooms and secure hard-to-find jobs may now be faced with the added stress of hostile work environments. And they may continue to bear the burden in silence due to fear of retaliation. The moral and ethical case for taking measures to address violence and harassment in workspaces is clear, but so is the economic case. First slide, please. In a report to inform the Australian Human Rights Commission, Deloitte shared that in 2018, sexual harassment cost $2.6 billion in lost productivity and $0.9 billion in other financial costs. Each case of harassment represents around 4 working days of lost output. Employers bore 70% of the financial costs, governments 23%, and individuals 7%. Lost well-being for victims was an additional $250 million, or nearly $5,000 per victim on average. The full extent of workforce harassment cannot be understood or addressed by employers and governments alike unless there is reliable data disaggregated by gender, ethnicity, ability, immigration status, and sexual orientation. Such data is lacking, making it difficult to assess how harassment intersects with racism, transphobia, ableism, and ageism. ILO C-190 and Recommendation 206 provide the very measures needed to track, report, and address the challenges workers face, regardless of their work sector, status, or type of work. Employers are insufficiently committed to exercising their responsibility to protect their staff. Ratification of C-190 is crucial as it also reinforces implementation of the UN SDGs 3, 5, 8, and 9, and member state commitment to ILO Declaration on Social Justice for a Fair Globalization. We urge governments to rise to the challenges and guarantee safe, decent, and productive work environment that adhere to human rights norms. As Guy Ryder, Director General of the ILO, shared at the launch event of the Action Week, NGOs and CSOs are key partners to advancing ratification of C-190 and its implementation. The NGO coalition looks forward to continued engagement and generating the necessary momentum on the ground to advance efforts by the member states. Last slide, please, which provides our calls for action. Thank you for your kind attention.
No, Anita, I want to thank you for your commitment and how you collectively work on this, and for your recommendations, and also pointing to how the most vulnerable are, as always, the worst hit also in this area. and also making the financial argument as if, you know, it shouldn't be needed, but it's an additional argument for employers and governments to move forward on this. Thank you very much. I want to pass the floor now to a member state, Fiji, who is part of the Pacific Island states, who, as we know, are not saved from this scourge of gender-based violence, as this is a global phenomena. But we're very happy to see Fiji being so upfront and early in actually the second country to move towards ratification of the convention. So Satyendra, Ambassador, very keen to hear your thoughts of the Fiji reasoning behind this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olof, and thank you very much, Deputy Director Martha and Anita, for your excellent briefings and setting the context, and to members of the group of friends, good morning to all of you. It's not always that in our line of business at UN we get an occasion to mark the coming into force of a new convention or a treaty. I'm not sure why we are not doing this on Friday last week, but I understand, I think Ambassador Olof may have been traveling, but nevertheless, it's a very special occasion. So I do not know what is the right term. Is it happy birthday or happy birth or whatever is the right term to everybody. The convention coming into force is a very significant point, and I will not go over the details. They've been very well captured, but let me make a few framing remarks about the convention, that it recognizes violence and harassment in the world of work, where men and women in the world of work spend more time in an over 24-hour period or over a 7-day period than in the life outside that. The convention has taken in my view, I'm not an expert in this, an excellent framing of the terms relating to violence and harassment, and really elaborates on much of the rich work that has been done by specialists and by the civil society, especially. These are behaviors that relate to all dimensions of work that lead to physical, psychological, sexual, or economic harm, and that is a very welcome, I think, addition in framing that. For us member states, we are given now a responsibility to promote a general environment of zero tolerance in the whole context of gender equality, in the context of helping us get closer to SDGs. It is a new labor standard, and it applies to all categories of work as well. And this is something that many of member states are struggling with. Formal contracts is what we know, but these are informal contracts, internships, whole variety of ways in which people interact in the new world of work. So I think as one of the newer conventions, it captures that very rich dynamics. And I will say that this may be a bit challenging for some member states, but nevertheless, it's absolutely the right thing. Ambassador Olof, Fiji was the second country to ratify this, but I must say, I think we should have been the first. We had our airspace had closed down, and I understand that we had a delay as a consequence of that in sending the instruments. And that is why we're the second, but nevertheless, it's still a good position to be in. For Fiji, there are three elements. Let me comment about in the of our journey. First is about the political will. I think there's not much to be said if you do not have a political will right at the top of government, at the heart of government. That is then enabled by very proactive civil society that is part of the context. And, absolutely, without doubt, Fiji's Prime Minister, Fiji's Minister for Women, who's been driving a lot of the work in the preparation whole of government and the opposition parts of government, different parties in opposition. There's a general convergence, not general, but a universal convergence on agreeing to proceed with much haste. And that reflects both the political commitment, but also, as Mr. Olof had said, the level of how large the problem is. Fiji's violence against women and girls is a big, huge problem, and we are not shy to admit that. And the trends are not in the right direction. The trends are in the negative direction. And so it also responds to that. And this is enabled, much of the progress has also been enabled by very rich civil society who have worked extremely closely with government in getting us to this position. The second set of remarks about the context is, where does 190 fit in relation to the body of the legal architecture and the whole other parts that it relates to. It is not a standalone convention. It must fit into an environment, and Fiji has generally had a favorable environment, and there were not too many secondary laws or primary laws that needed to be adjusted or expanded. In fact, this came as a very neat complement. And the first part is Fiji's new constitution, which has a very strong Bill of Rights at its heart, and non-discrimination is part of the Bill of Rights. The flowing out of that, and that is a relatively new constitution. Coming out of that is a 2009 Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Act that flows out of that constitution, that also takes all forms of violence and harassment and defines them in the human rights context in very specific and neat ways. So that's a few years after the constitution coming into force. And so the work on 190 on this convention that is against that grain, and I think that was very helpful. And maybe not all countries would be in that same context. Some may have older laws when our understanding with slightly different, etc. So let's say that's an excellent wicket. Besides the political will that I've talked about, the overall legal architecture and the framework was very good. And the third part, which Deputy Director Newton talked about, was the consensus between and the very favorable environment in which the tripartite parties, the unions and stakeholders related to them, employers generally defined, not only traditional large employers, but employers in the small and medium size enterprises, where a lot more women are employed than in the larger enterprises, and the government working together and with difficulty. These things are never easy. I'm not trying to put a gloss on this. These are always difficult, and there are many other things, usually in discussions about this that also complicate this process. But that overall a commitment by the tripartite constituencies to work through, to seek a good outcome, and try to progress the ratification and the public consultations in the speediest possible time. So that was the third part of it. Challenges, of course, there are challenges. And the one I've just alluded to. The second is Fiji is a small state. It has a limited legal space. There are many laws that need to go before the parliament at any point. The parliament needs to convene many public consultations, and so you really need a political will for a convention like this to rise above so many other things that are part of the mix, and all they are important as well. They're about poverty, they're about disasters, they're about livelihoods, etc. So it is, and Parliament meets, X number of days in a year. You can't extend, these times are predefined, and so that's one part of it. The technical and the legal support that goes in a highly specialized area such as this is limited, narrow in Fiji, I presume for even smaller states that might be even larger climb. But thank you very much, ILO. Thank you, UN Women, for providing the complement and the support that we needed at any point. So that's second part of the challenge, and of course COVID came at the sort of tail end of it, so I'm not blaming COVID, but nevertheless we should have been the first country to get this over the line. But we take our second, and on being second, one of the things that this has contributed to, this is not the end of the story. So Fiji is the second country in the world now to be developing a national action plan on violence against women and girls. Australia is the first; they've beaten us to it. So we're the second. So we're very happy to be second in two significant processes. It will be completed, I think, by the end of this year. It's a extensive in terms of modality. It's an extensive way of framing gender-based violence, all dimensions of that. What are the roles of institutions? What are the roles of stakeholders? You map them, you understand them. What are the drivers at different levels, cultural settings, in traditional settings, in the market settings, etc. And you interrogate all of them and find deep understanding and explanation, and find and try to at the end come up with an integrated action plan that time bound, very specific, very precise, that can get us over the line. So that work has commenced, led beautifully by Fiji's Minister for Women. We hope that it will be completed. Fiji is the second country to be progressing on this, on both this and 190. We'd be very, very happy to share our experiences with the other countries, especially in the Pacific Islands, and share insights and experiences, as well as the technical assistance that we have now managed to accumulate as being part of this process. Thank you very much, Mr. Olof.
Satyendra, thank you very much for going through the process of ratification in Fiji and the reasons that why you went for this. And of course, you should have been first. I realize that's clear with that commitment. And I think you stressed some other points here, and I think they're very important. Everyone who has joined this group of friends, I think, acknowledge and should acknowledge that their countries are struggling with this issue, and it's a global phenomenon. And I think the fact that we are very open with each other, sharing experiences of what has worked, and that could be a lessons learned for others. I think that is part of exactly why we set up this in the first place. And you've offered some very, very concrete examples of how you're working with this. And then, of course, we had the connection to the SDGs. It's brilliant that we also have a convention that helps us to move forward on various SDGs related to this particular issue. So that's all good. Thank you very much. Before we open up the floor to colleagues, part of the group, and thank you to our three panelists for setting the scene. But before we move to the next discussion, I wanted to open up for us to hear from our Deputy Regional Director of UN Women in Southeast Asia, who will, I think, tell us about a very concrete example of a program that aims at eliminating gender-based violence in the world of work in Southeast Asia. So Sarah Nips, Deputy Regional Director of UN Women, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Olof, and good afternoon and good morning, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. It's really fantastic to be here and have the opportunity to share a little bit on the Safe and Fair program with you. If I could go to the second slide, please. So the Safe and Fair program is actually part of the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative, which you probably are all very well aware is a very major global commitment to eliminating violence against women. And this particular program focuses on violence against migrant women workers in the ASEAN region. It works across 9 countries and really aims, as the name suggests, to ensure that labour migration is safe and fair for women. It's a 5-year programme and it's implemented by a partnership of ILO, together with UN Women, and also working with ODC. Next slide, please. I don't think I need to say too much about this because our distinguished panelists already made it very clear that violence against women in the workplace is particularly a problem for certain vulnerable groups. And what I want to just emphasize is that women migrant workers are one of those vulnerable groups. Because of structural inequalities, because of the kind of work they're doing, because sometimes of their status of not being documented, and because of the discrimination that they often face in their home country and in the country that they go to work in, women migrant workers are at particular risk of violence in their working life. Next slide, please. So the Safe and Fair programme is taking a kind of multi-layered approach, working at the level of laws and policies. And of course, I should say here that this very much includes advocating for the ratification of both Convention 189 and Convention 190. It's also about enhancing systems and building capacities among service providers to really ensure that women migrant workers are able to be reached by the kinds of services that are available for violence against women. It's about also supporting employers and recruitment companies and agencies to have more gender sensitive and human right and respectful of human rights practices. Thirdly, and extremely importantly, it's also about empowering women migrant workers, which is really about organising and forming peer networks of mutual support and of potential solidarity and negotiation, as well as ensuring that women migrant workers understand more about their rights and also where they can go for help and support. As of course, the experience of being a woman migrant worker outside of your own culture and your own language can be an extremely lonely one and a very difficult one when problems happen. And finally, and also very importantly, it's about shifting attitudes and behaviours towards women migrant workers. As I already mentioned, these women are often suffering from quite a lot of discrimination and stigma in the community because of their migration status. So we also are organising public campaigns to try to change attitudes and behaviours towards women migrant workers, who I think we all understand very well are in fact undertaking often a very courageous journey in order to be of economic huge importance to their families, their communities, and to the countries that they come from, as well as the countries where they work. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to highlight that in the 4 years, that we're in the 4th year now of the programme. I just wanted to highlight a few of the sort of achievements that we're very proud to have in the first 3 years, just in terms of some of the results. So these are around, of course, as I mentioned, legal and policy formulation, around working with CSOs. I think it's a very, very important part of our work to ensure that CSOs are fully involved and engaged, as they provide really such a kind of special opportunity to reach women migrant workers and also to represent the voices of women migrant workers. We've also looked at disseminating and producing a lot of knowledge products, because we do really want to increase understanding of the issues that women migrant workers face. Really, they're often quite invisible. And then on the right-hand side, to look at some of the impact on people, we've been working to strengthen the capacity of over 20,000 frontline workers and service providers across the 9 countries where we work. Services have already reached 84,000 plus women migrant workers. And of course, as we've now front-loaded more capacity building, that will grow. And we also have been working to organise groups of women, as I mentioned. And finally, already more than 6 million people have been reached by some of the public awareness campaign work that we've been doing. Next slide, please. And finally, just to say, I don't expect you to be able to read this, it's very small print, but perhaps you will have a chance to have a look afterwards. I just wanted to say that we found that one of the most important things that we like to do in the programme is to really ensure that the voices of women migrant workers come through and that their own stories are amplified, because of course they are the ones who are experts in voicing their own experiences. So amplifying that has been a very important part of what we're trying to do. And here are some of the examples of some of the stories that we've been sharing. So really integrating women's voices into policies, laws, programs is absolutely critical, including, of course, those women who are survivors of violence. We've been working to mobilise governments, employers, trade unions, civil society organisations, women's organisations and youth groups. And we really believe that it's only by joining forces with all of these different groups that we can actually bring focused attention to violence against migrant women workers and really bring this issue into the spotlight and place it at the center of efforts to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment. So in closing, I would finally just like to once again mention and thank the European Union for the amazing leadership and commitment that's been shown through the Spotlight Initiative. And I hope this has given a small example of some of the work that can be done through this modality. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for the work you do and for focusing on the migrant situation of migrant workers, which is, of course, a particular challenging and something that many governments should be focusing on for the reasons that you mentioned. And thank you also for your reference to the Spotlight Initiative, which I know many countries are able to benefit from, and UN Women. Right, so I would now like to open the floor to members of the group. Very interested to hear your reflections from where you sit, your country's experiences, but also ideas about how we collectively here at the UN can move this agenda forward. I think the best way is for you to ask for the floor in the chat box. I see that some of you have done that already. You're becoming very apt at operating in the Zoom format. But I would also ask that if possible, keep your statements to the point and 2 to 3 minutes in order to allow for others to come in as well before we need to close down here. So I start with Maria del Carmen, the PR of Argentina. Maria.
Thank you, Olof. Dear colleagues, I will be brief. First of all, I want to thank you, the Ambassador of the European Union to the UN, Olof Skoog, for organizing this very timely and important meeting that allow us to share good practices and experiences in the field of harassment and violence in the world of work. Argentina has a strong commitment in the fight against gender-based violence in all spheres. And this is also reflected through the ratification of the ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment in the world of work. This process was completed last February 2021, this year, through the deposit of the instrument of ratification. Before, actual administration succeeded in ensuring this goal by fostering law number 27,580 that passed last December 2020. As you can see, this has been of the main objectives set by the government since it took office. In effect, the convention set a roadmap for us to continue working to prevent and eliminate gender violence, forcing us to carry out normative and other transformations that bring us closer to a society free of violence. Let me share with you that my country is the fourth country to ratify the convention. And since its ratification, it has 1 year to adapt the internal regulation to the provision of the instrument, and in particular, to enact a law that embraces the provision of the Convention 190. The Ministry of Labor, Employment and Social Security, together with the Ministry of Women, Genders and Diversity, are currently working to guarantee its implementation. As a matter of fact, the Convention 190 reinforces and it's aligned with international human rights law and with our national legislation, in particular, the law on comprehensive protection to prevent, punish, and eradicate violence against women, which includes as one of its modality, the one that takes place in the world of work. Furthermore, ILO and the government of Argentina are working closely on a roadmap to implement the convention. In that regard, in 2020, an interministerial table was created to establish an action plan in charge of the Ministry of Labor, Employment and Social Security, Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity, Ministry of Productive Development, and Ministry of Justice, Economic and Human Rights, as well as the Secretariat for Management and Public Employment. Other decentralized organizations such as the National Institute Against Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Racism have joined this table. The respective plan consists as the following 5 pillars. 1, conducted a tripartite consultation. 2, preparing a preliminary draft of the law referring precisely to the application of the norm. 3, organizing debates with actors related to the world of work. 4, launching a training program for companies and unions. 5, federal approach to this process in charge of the interministerial table. Last but not least, we do believe that the mere sensation of the norm is not enough. The lack of economic independence is a very important barrier to face situations of violence. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is even more relevant to address this issue. In this sense, the right to live a life free of violence and to develop autonomous life projects without discrimination is presented as an essential condition to live in more equal, just, and respectful societies for the human rights of all people. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Maria. I now have the following list of colleagues who've asked for the floor, starting with Mexico, El Salvador, Netherlands, Malta, Panama, Finland, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Lebanon, Albania, and Greece so far. So quite a lot of colleagues. So let's keep it short and to the point. So Alicia, Mexico.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much, Olof, Skoog, thank you for this very important event. Dear colleagues, we thank the organizers for convening this timely meeting, and we applaud the entry into force just days ago of ILO Convention number 190. As it has already been mentioned, it is a landmark instrument that highlights the importance of ending gender-based violence and harassment against women in the world of work. This is a significant milestone in the advancement of gender equality and women's empowerment. Mexico views with great concern the exacerbated sexual and gender-based violence, including harassment, that women have faced for years in their workplace, which constitutes not only a human rights violation, but it is also one of the main obstacles preventing the full participation of women in the labor force and the economies everywhere. Particularly in the light of COVID-19 and in the context of remote and digital work, violence and harassment have increased dramatically through different manifestations and means. So let me share with you some measures and policies put in place recently by my country to curb violence and harassment at work. First of all, I am happy to share that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is currently working with the National Institute for Women and the Ministry of Labor to define strategic steps to ratify ILOC 190. We believe there are legal and institutional conditions for Mexico to do so, and we see the ratification as an opportunity to strengthen the existing legal framework and create the ideal conditions to change the organizational culture of public and private work centers, and thereby influence to further protect and guarantee women's labor human rights. In Mexico, we also believe that the ratification of Convention 190 could enhance national implementation of specific legislations in the field of cyberbullying and digital violence, such as the Olympia Law, which came into force at the beginning of this month, joining a set of legislative reforms aimed at recognizing digital violence and punishing crimes that violate the sexual privacy of people, especially women, of course, through digital media, also known as cyber violence. And we have heard this morning also about this issue. So far, more than half of the federal entities have typified the conduct as a result of the Olympia law. Moreover, as a follow-up to the action protocol against cases of workplace violence, sexual harassment and abuse aimed at companies in the Mexican Republic, published in 2017, in March 2020, the Ministry of Labor published an updated protocol model to prevent, attend, and eradicate workplace violence in work centers, available to employers as an instrument of prevention and intervention in cases of workplace violence, sexual harassment, and abuse, which supports companies to promote favorable organizational environments free of violence. We recognize that although we have frameworks and mechanisms to prevent and address sexual violence in the workplace, much remains to be done to transform the social norms that perpetuate patriarchal domination, systematic discrimination, prejudices, gender inequality, and the stigmatization of victims. Mexico is deeply committed to advance gender equality and ensure the well-being of all women in all their diversity. We are grateful to all those states which are actively engaged in the Generation Equality Forum, and especially those members part of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. Your meaningful participation will be essential to guarantee a gender-responsive COVID-19 recovery and a better future for all women and girls in the years to come. Ambassador Skoog, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning.
No, thank you, thank you. I want to pass the floor now to Griselda, El Salvador, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Ambassador Olof and dear friends. It's so nice to see you. I would like to thank the group of friends team for organizing this meeting, and also the representatives of the NGO Coalition to End Violence and Harassment in the World of Work, and ILO for their presentation. Let me just share some practices to fight the violence and harassment at workplace in El Salvador. For instance, we have recognized the right to a life free of violence for women since 1995 with the ratification of this Inter-American Convention to Prevent, Punish, and Eradicate Violence Against Women. And since 2011, violence in the workplace has been defined in this special comprehensive law for a life free of violence for women. And likewise, as the work of the Salvadoran Institute for the Development of Women, ISDEMO, in December 2020, 13 central government institutions have protocols for action in cases of harassment and sexual harassment in the workplaces. And among these institutions is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which has also promoted a policy of zero tolerance for violence against women in the workplace. These protocols seek to provide a more straightforward process for women who are in situation of violence and harassment in the workplaces to file complaints. And this initiative responds to the obligation of the states to act with due diligence to protect, respect, and guarantee a life free of violence for all women. I agree with Ambassador Olof's recommendation on creating more awareness on this issue and to guarantee safe places for work on women. And the numbers are shocking. A very limited number of women file a complaint. And in this sense, let me share one of the experience that I coordinated with the Office on Gender Issues of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a workshop on the policy of zero tolerance for violence against women in the workplace. This workshop took place last April 2021, and I realized that even myself, I wasn't aware of this important process. So it was relevant, this exchange, for all of us to know this framework, and also that women to know the right of have a life free of violence, even in the workplaces. Having said that, I would like to thank UN Women representative in that share their project about the work on women migrant workers. We will welcome this kind of initiative and campaigns be replicated also in other regions. And to conclude, Violence and harassment against women is a problem that hinders the full development of our societies. And we are convinced that improving women's participation in leadership in public and private life could greatly contribute to tackling gender-based violence and harassment also in the world of work. I thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Griselda, for that. Jokka, PR of the Netherlands, please.
Thank you, Olof, and thanks to you and the NGO Coalition and ILO for bringing us together today. And I fully agree with you, Olof, that a really important part of the group of friends is to have these open and frank discussions. So also a big thank you to the presenters who again have made clear, that harassment and violence at work continues to be a serious problem all over the world, and that COVID-19 has only further exacerbated this situation. So it's good, I think, that we're having this meeting now when we're talking about recovery to get out of the pandemic, and let's make sure that we move to, I think, a better normal is what Marta just called it, and make sure that we protect those that are most vulnerable. And thanks for the presentation on women migrant workers, really impressive. We were asked to say a few things about our own countries. So in the Netherlands, it is estimated that 61% of working women and 18% of working men have experienced some form of harassment in the workplace. And although it is by no means a new phenomena, a study on sexual intimidation at work by the Dutch Institute for Human Rights, which was just published yesterday, found again that underreporting remains a serious issue. And both you, Olof, and Griselda just spoke about that. And I know we've heard it before, but let me repeat still that many victims fear that the incidents might just not be serious enough to report, that they might be seen as overreacting in the eyes of colleagues, although the impact on both personal and working life is really substantive. And on top of that, many victims that did report felt it didn't improve the situation, but even made it worse. So that all goes to say that there's a lot about behavior and mentality change that needs to be done. Maybe two things that are important for that, according to the law in the Netherlands, employers have to offer a safe working environment free of sexual intimidation and harassment. And consultations are now on the way when it comes to the ratification of C119. And let me congratulate Fiji on being second on two of these important issues twice in a row. But also having open discussions and raising awareness is a cornerstone of Dutch policy. So what we, for instance, do is we have public campaigns to raise awareness. We integrate education on sexuality and sexual diversity in the curriculum of young students, so they are aware and create resilience from young age onwards. And importantly, by no longer looking at sexual intimidation and harassment as a problem of women and girls, but making men and boys part of the solution. To conclude, as I said, much work remains to be done in the Netherlands, but also at global level. So as a co-founder of the group of friends to eliminate sexual harassment, the Netherlands is committed to a zero tolerance approach to sexual harassment in the workplace and elsewhere. And I'm pleased to announce that Kenya will be organizing the next meeting of the group of friends on the 7th of July. And we look forward to continuing this conversation then. Thank you, Olof.
Thanks very much, Jokka. Excellent. So I have Vanessa, Malta, followed by Panama next. Vanessa. We cannot hear you.
Okay, I was waiting for
now
you
to. We can, yep.
Thank you, Olof. Malta joins the other country in the call to end violence and harassment at work. We welcome today's meeting on the occasion of the ILO Action Week. Workers should not be subjected to physical or mental harm during work duties and beyond. Since work has been transferred online in certain sectors due to the pandemic, likewise has the abuse. Hiding behind screens has made exploitation and harassment all the more accessible to perpetrators. and women remain disproportionately affected by violence and harassment at work at certain workplaces, including due to imbalanced power dynamics. I'd like to share Malta's experience in addressing the theme. Though Malta has yet to ratify the ILO Convention number 190, national legislation is in place to address violence and sexual harassment in the workplace. Maltese law seeks to protect employees from harassment from their employer or fellow employee. Cases of harassment can be reported to the Industrial Tribunal, to the Department of Industrial and Employment Relations, or to the National Commission for the Promotion of Equality, who would investigate the claims. Furthermore, the National Commission for the Promotion of Equality also certifies companies and organizations that prioritize gender equality with the equality mark. By introducing this, companies are encouraged to have in place policies that address sexual harassment in the workplace. The Commission also provides assistance to employers to draft and update such policies. As of May 2021, 113 companies with over 26,400 employees have been certified with the equality mark. However, we are mindful that more needs to be done to create awareness in the workplace to ensure that cases of sexual harassment are reported and do not go unnoticed. Victims need to have access to remedies and also be offered protection. Victims must not run the risk of being intimidated or silenced, and perpetrators must always be held accountable. In conclusion, we need to do all that is possible to protect workers as they contribute to the common good of our country, and therefore their well-being must be protected. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I have Panama now, followed by Jukka from Finland. Panama.
Good morning, distinguished colleagues. I would like to thank you, Ambassador Olof and the European Union for bringing us together to this important meeting. I would like to share with you today relevant actions that we are putting in practice in our country in order to contribute to reduction of violence and harassment in the workplace with an approach that includes the public sector, business sector, international organizations, and NGOs. Our efforts are focused on generating and optimizing alliance between stakeholders based on cooperation, knowledge generation, and capacity building. Based on this approach, we have implemented strategic lines such as awareness, advocacy, partnership, capacity building, and leadership. Here are some of these actions. Awareness. We are working with the Panamanian, but also multinational companies through workshops called the ABC of Gender, Business Forum, and campaigns of Women Empowering Principles, capacity building, e-learning of gender equality in the business, and family-friendly policies. Advocacy, Panama Resolution 733 of 2019 from December 5th, signed by the Minister of the Labor and Labor Development, adopts the protocol to
Sorry, I think we lost you just the last few seconds. You were unmuted.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, but you're back. Go ahead.
Okay, Advocacy, Panama Resolution 733 by 2019 from December 5th, signed by the Minister of the Labor and Labor Development, adopts the protocol to identify, attend, and prevent violence gender in the business workplace. The construction of the protocol was constituted by an effort of the implementation of the law 82 of the October 2013 for the prevention of violence and femicide and participatory process between business sector, the government, and international cooperation. This process was led and promoted by Global Compact Panama Sumarse, and it is an example of successful results of all sectors coming together to advance towards a highly sustainable human development. Also, implementation of the program Avancemos on the well-being of workers has included talks and workshops on the prevention of violence as masculinities to the business sector. Leadership. It is was prepared as multi-stakeholder document survey titled Good Business Practice to Promote Gender Equality, COVID-19 Impact and Implemented Measures. The progress towards the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Agenda with attention of the SDGs 5, 8, 10, and 17 requires the articulation of intersectoral and interinstitutional efforts. Finally, I want to share with you a good news. Last May 12, 2021, Panama Minister's Cabinet, chaired by our President Laurentino Cortizo, approved the Resolution 58 by which the Minister of Foreign Affairs is authorized to propose to the National Assembly the Convention of 190 regarding to the elimination of violence harassment in the work environment. We are facing many challenges. The consequences are deepened with the COVID-19 pandemic. However, social, cultural, and economic transformation will be imperative to achieve the 2030 agenda. Our country has a strong commitment to continue working for a just, inclusive, and violence-free society. We need all sectors to break down the barriers of discrimination and violence, and only through cooperation can we achieve it. Thank you, Excellency.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Now I have Jukka, Finland, followed by Jamaica and Dominican Republic. Jukka, Finland.
Thanks, Olof, and thanks for sort of bringing us together and organizing this event. And I was very impressed by Satyendra's sort of intervention on progress being made in Fiji. Finland is, of course, sort of among the countries committed to ratifying the convention. And in the meanwhile, I think that we are taking a similar approach to many other countries, that we are sort of seeing this as an occupational safety and health measure in a way that, and with the aim of a policy of zero tolerance on harassment or any gender-based violence at the workplace. And this has proven sort of reasonably effective because it brings into play sort of national authorities sort of monitoring the implementation. And of course, gender-based violence is a huge problem in Finland as well, and we need to make more progress, and we know how much sort of intimate partner violence has increased during the pandemic, and where sort of working from home can pose a risk. But there's one sort of national sort of measure that's been quite successful, and I know that this can't be sort of implemented everywhere, but we still have national conscription, which means that most young men sort of are sort of do their sort of military service, and we have had a compulsory training on non-violence and handling of emotions as part of the conscription service, and this is really producing also sort of very practical effects and progress, and of course opening new shelters for survivors is also one measure that we've taken. And online violence and harassment is a real problem, and we are sort of doing our share sort of as part of the Generation Equality, sort of leading the Action Coalition on technology and innovation, and one of the key actions is really combating online gender-based violence, and many of the results of the Action Coalition will be presented this week at the Generation Equality Forum in Paris. But thanks, and this is really an important topic.
Thanks a lot, Jukka. I appreciate it. And I was thinking, listening to you and also to some other interventions, that maybe another topic that we should address in this group moving forward is precisely how we, are able to work with men and boys, because let's face it, those are the perpetrators of much of this scourge that we're talking about. And unless we reach out to them and see how, the good examples of working with them, we will probably fail, regardless of beautiful conventions and legislation in the end. So thanks a lot. I now have Jamaica, please. Denise.
Thank you, Ambassador Olof. Let me first extend our appreciation to the co-chairs for organizing discussions on this very important issue. We want to also thank the ILO representative, Ms. Newton, for reminding us of the exponential increase in online violence and sexual harassment. I am sure that many of us women here can relate as well to the blurred lines between our personal and professional life as we try to do our work here at the UN, having had to be online for such long periods of time at home. I also wanted to say thank you to Ms. Thomas from the NGO Coalition for Ending Violence. She made a very good point on the moral and ethical cases that we need to consider, as well as the economic issues for consideration during this discussion. Of course, it's no secret that throughout this pandemic, women have been disproportionately affected. Indeed, Martha, the pandemic has a feminine face, as many of the industries in the formal economy directly affected by the quarantines and the lockdowns are those which there is a very high female labor force. In Jamaica's, for our position, we see the travel industry, the tourism industry, as well as the restaurants and the food production industries as being some of the hard hit workplaces that women are really the most, well, the high labor force in these places. It gets even worse as some of these women are heading low income households. Being in this situation, we recognize that women and girls are more vulnerable actually and prone to situations that place them at a disadvantage. They're more susceptible to violence and harassment of all kinds, including sexual harassment. That is why ending all forms of violence against women and girls are a top priority for the government of Jamaica. We also believe that the national and global responses in this regard must be gender specific and must take into consideration the role of women, and in particular their contribution to the participation in the workforce across the globe. In Jamaica's case, we continue to strengthen our legislative and policy frameworks to reduce and eliminate acts of violence against women, including in the workplace. In 2019, we established a joint select committee of Parliament to consult with stakeholders and consider and report on a draft Sexual Harassment Act. This is being pursued out of the recognition that a gap exists within the legislative framework and that there was no avenue for redress by victims under Jamaican law. The Act seeks to provide protection, prevention, and redress where a claim of sexual harassment that is employment-related occurs in educational institutions. This is emphasized, that is the educational institution, given that there are more women in tertiary institutions than men. However, the power dynamics are reversed. We also arise in the context of accommodations is also made. We anticipate that the passage of the bill will follow in the coming months. We are also pursuing other initiatives to protect our women and girls, especially during these difficult times. You would have heard from UN Women, Sarah Gibbs, when she spoke of the Spotlight Initiative. Jamaica is also involved in this such activity. We continue as well to implement the National Strategic Action Plan for the Elimination of Gender-Based Violence. We're also reforming existing legislation such as the Domestic Violence Act to include harsher penalties for breaches. We have established a multi-sectoral task force, including with a gender activist, to oversee Jamaica's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Before concluding, I would like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Satyendra Prasad from the Fiji for his presentation on his country's experience in ratifying the ILO Convention 190. We also congratulate the ILO on the entry into force of the ILO Violence and Harassment Convention. Although Jamaica is not yet a party to the convention, we are considering the further strengthening of the legislative framework through future accession and ratification. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Jamaica. I have Dominican Republic, followed by Lebanon and Albania and Greece. Dominican Republic, Joan.
Thank you, Ambassador. I hope you hear me. Yes, I'll be very, very brief. First of all, I'm very excited to be here for the first time in my case and to share some of the actions that the DR is putting forward to address this critical issue in which we do have a lot to do still. First of all is that last November, we decided to put forward a strategic plan in order to address all aspects of violence against women, including in the workspace. And this plan will include addressing the structural changes and social changes that are required in order to achieve this plan's aspiration. And just to tell you, some of the specific goals of the plan is to first and foremost educate the population to identify violence against women and girls, and in all its types. And second, once you are able to identify, speak up and condemn these acts of violence against women. And that goes to the point of more men and boys educated in the importance of speaking up and adding their voice to the women's. And finally, this plan plans to educate the population, civil society, in practical measures to address violence against women. Small things that they can do in the daily basis to eradicate this phenomenon. This in terms of the plan. In terms of a legal framework, of course, we are very behind. We have to acknowledge that, but in a way it's a good thing because we are planning to have a comprehensive legal and framework that addresses, let's say, modern acts of violence, including online violence and bullying. So this is an ongoing process in the Dominican Republic, and we hope to move forward quickly. I wanted also to share a very interesting plan that we are putting forward with UN Women at the local level, and it is the instauration of a seal for private companies that commit themselves to protecting environments, enabling safe environments for women. And so far we have 8 certified companies and 12 public institutions also certified. This is, I think, a very important step, particularly for the government. In the Dominican Republic, the government is perhaps the #1 employer for women. So we have to lead by example, and it's very encouraging to see that 12 public institutions have been certified by this seal. Finally, we will work together with our Ministry of Women, our Ministry of Work, in order to make the ratification of C-190 a reality. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Joan. Some interesting examples from Dominican Republic, and thank you for moving forward on ratification on the convention. Lebanon, Amal, are you there?
Yes.
Good to see you.
Yes, hi, good to see you. Thank you very much, dear Ambassador Olof, for holding this meeting and for your remarks. And I also would like to thank the briefers for their interventions and the good ideas and good news about the progress in countries on this subject. The topic we are discussing today is of utmost importance and relevance for Lebanon. According to a 2017 survey by UN Women, nearly 60% of women in Lebanon experienced some form of sexual harassment in their life. And I want to tell you now, with the internet and with digital technology, harassment is taking on a more sinister form, and the victims in a traditional society where shame is very important and people put so much emphasis on shame, it's leading many young girls to commit suicide. And we have many cases the last couple of years on this, especially lately. But last year, Lebanon's parliament has endorsed a landmark law criminalizing sexual harassment that could see perpetrators spend up to 4 years in prison and pay fines up to 50 times the minimum wage. The new law criminalizes sexual harassment, especially in the workplace, and affords protection to both the victim and the witnesses who testify against the accused. It creates a specialized fund at the Social Affairs Ministry tasked with offering support and rehabilitation to victims and raising awareness about sexual harassment. It also gives victims the right to seek compensation. This new law is just a starting point and an inspiring shift in our country, where we are strongly pushing for gender equality and for the protection of women from all forms of violence and harassment. On the occasion of the ILO Action Week to free the world of work from violence and harassment, we welcome the entry into force of ILO Convention number 190 after its ratification by 6 countries, and we see this meeting as an opportunity for us to listen and learn from the experiences of others, as we did. Regarding Generation Equality Forum, Lebanon has been very engaged in the sessions in Mexico, and we are looking forward to the forum in Paris. The National Commission for Lebanese Women, alongside many of our NGOs, are actively participating in the forum. One of our NGOs, Abad, that aims to achieve gender equality in the MENA region, is one of the 17 global leaders in the Action Coalition on Violence Against Women. So we're making progress. We still have a long way to go, as many other countries do, but we have to combat this and we have to do it right. I thank you.
Excellent, Amal. Thank you very much. Albania, please. Besiana, are you with us? Albania? No, then let's go straight on to Maria from Greece. Maria, are you there?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Sorry,
Besiana, sorry. No, sorry. Let's go back to, sorry, Maria. I missed. Besiana was there. It's just the muting thing again that complicates life. Besiana, we hear you now. Maria, you're after. Besiana, go ahead.
Olof, for organizing the meeting, and many thanks also to the panelists. Many reports suggest that gender-based online sexual harassment occurs while working remotely and is even on the rise, a trend likely to continue as many employers maintain a remote workforce. It clearly impacts the most vulnerable members of society, namely women and girls. Taking a gender-blind approach is ineffective in the face of evidence suggesting that online violence is experienced differently by girls and boys. To address this issue, the 2019 Convention on Violence and Harassment and the recommendation are the first international instruments setting out specific and universal standards on tackling work-related harassment and violence. Here, I'd like to make 3 quick points. First, there is an imperative need for legal measures to regulate the offline and also online work environment, since gender-based violence does not know boundaries. Many countries lack clear laws and legislation to deal with ICT-facilitated violence against women. And so there are several challenges in developing such legal frameworks, given the lack of clear definitions and data. In this regard, the Albanian Labor Code has included since 2015 definitions of moral and sexual harassment in the workplace and provisions regarding the support and protection of victims and whistleblowers. Amendments to the Labor Code are in compliance with relevant European legislation. The law on gender equality is one of the main legal measures that our country has in order to guarantee fair and equal working conditions for every employee. It specifically provides a definition on sexual harassment in the workplace in full compliance with EU Directive 2006/54/EC. Secondly, we need civic confidence in public institutions. It's important to build trust that state institutions will hold perpetrators accountable through transparent and fair processes in order to earn the confidence of victims of gender-based violence. Thirdly, Albania supports an integrated, holistic approach to protecting and caring for victims. In order to reverse the trends, government sectors, civil society, and international bodies must put forth a coordinated effort to best advocate for women and girls. In concluding, I'd like to say that this is a phenomenon that changes with the times, and as such, we must adapt, innovate, share ideas, and enforce meaningful legislation. And lastly, we need more men standing up for women's rights. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bessiana. Very, very good points, very clear. I'm glad you were unmuted. It's important to listen to you. Maria, Greece.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'll be very, very brief. I just want to commend to you for organizing this very important meeting in order to join forces and combat this global phenomenon and make sure that we all establish zero tolerance on the working environment. It has been said that pandemic has a feminine face, and definitely it exacerbate the harassment and tolerance in work. The message is clear. We have to stand strong and determined against anyone who tries to use fear as a means to impose power. And the way to do that is to be well informed on the rights on how to reach and where to address any question, complaint, or ask for help and further support. Greece remains committed to the enhancement of women and to providing adequate counseling services in order to empower victims of harassment to break their silence. The competent Ministry of Social Affairs has established a dedicated network that provides help, counseling, and protection to all women victims of any kind of harassment free of charge. In this vein, we have created a new digital platform, MeTooGreece.gr, with the tagline, "Together we break silence." And there is also a helpline where women can call to ask for counseling, psychological support, or even to file a complaint. At the same time, the Greek government is adopting high standards and a robust framework with regards to work-related harassment, and promotes as a top priority the ratification and full-fledged implementation of the relevant 190 ILO Convention. The new law will include provisions aiming at enhancing the existing legal framework so as to create a safety net and a zero-tolerance working environment regarding violence and harassment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. That, I think, concludes the members of the group, but we do have two very prominent civil society representatives with us, and I would like to allow them a minute or so each to maybe sum up your recommendations here. So starting with Hauri Guedelekian, chair of the NGO Committee on Status of Women, and then to Maria Fornella after that, and then we'll have to close, unfortunately. So Hauri, over to you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I will get right to the point and forego of the pleasantries. I just say that it is important to really include civil society. We need to understand that this toxic practice of harassment at the workplace does not serve anyone, including the employer. Before I got into the gender equality work, I was a business owner myself in the service industry. I can assure you it is good business to have a safe space for all employees, especially women. Think of it as preventative medicine. I personally am still dealing with some of the painful memories of the abuse I experienced and witnessed. As leaders, it is your role to make sure C-190 is ratified and implemented. Please do not let us down. We were shocked to see C-190 removed from the CSW 65 agreed conclusions. Honestly, it does not make sense. I am here to tell you that with our thousands of constituents, we are here to support you and amplify the work that you do with implementing and ratifying C-190. Thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you for boosting our morale and pushing us forward. Very good. Maria Fornella is chair of the NGO Committee on Social Development. Maria.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Olof. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm very happy that I have a few minutes at least. We're all here because we're committed to protect all human rights, human dignity, freedom, and social development. Fundamentally, the presence of violence and harassment in the workplace contravenes these core principles. Only by uniting against workplace violence and harassment can we achieve the most basic social development ambitions: decent work for all, safe work environments, sustainable economies, and inclusive societies. I echo the sentiments of my colleague Huri and also of Anita. Ratifying and implementing C-190 makes good business sense, good human sense, and good social development sense. Convention C-190 is another instrument for all countries to meet their obligations under existing human rights covenants, the United Nations Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the right of all to live free from violence, enshrined in both CEDAW and the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention. Violence at work drives people into low productivity, human suffering, and unemployment. It contributes to poverty, economic disempowerment, and inequalities. Let's use this opportunity that COVID-19 has created. It's a watershed between two eras of human history. Let's build a society that is just and that eliminates violence and harassment from the world of work. Only then can we claim we have built forward better. It is in this sense that we urge you to sign and ratify C-190. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. Colleagues, we've actually quite perfectly concluded on time today, which is very unusual when I lead anything. So really a great thank you to everyone for bringing so many concrete ideas and reflections to the table today. Thank you to our panelists in particular. I think we've heard some very, very interesting recommendations very concretely on what is being worked on in various countries. I think we also always need to recall that all of this commitment starts at home with ourselves and what we do. We are leaders, as someone said, and we are managers in our own workplaces. We work here at the UN. We know that the UN has a code of conduct to prevent harassment at work. I think we need to keep insisting that that be fully implemented and that the UN and our own missions here be spaces where people feel free to also speak up when there are issues, and that we as leaders make sure that we deal with this very diligently, as many of you have pointed to. The ILO Convention 190 is the most comprehensive instrument to prevent and address violence and harassment in the world of work. I think the group of friends here has a role to play to promote the convention and its swift ratification. So we encourage all members of the group to join the global campaign that ILO has just launched and share messages on social media and other platforms. We will look at ways to promote the convention within the broader UN membership, possibly through the organization of an event on the occasion of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which I think is scheduled for November. Colleagues, according to the roadmap for this group, our next meeting should take place in September, hopefully then in a more physical format than we were able to do today, but all of that will of course depend on the modalities for the General Assembly, high-level week, etc. But for today, thank you very much everyone for your commitment and engagement, and have a good day out there and be safe.